come back together. Come on back and sit down. We'll continue to connect and fellowship after service. Also, feel free to connect with the people in the chat, message them. We don't want to forget them just because they're not able to be here in person. They are present with us. So you can join the chat during your phones. Normally, I guess pastors don't like it when people are on their phones during service, but you have my permission today as long as you are in the chat, right? Like, you can be even on YouTube in church, and I won't get mad at you. I won't get mad anyways. But if you're playing a game,
I'll get mad at you.
I'm not gonna. I'll be disappointed.
No, that's not what it is.
But now, I'm using my Dead Tree Bible today because my phone is recording. Yeah, it's made from paper, which is dead trees. It's not
It's
as,
alive though.
but it's the living word in a dead tree. How awesome is that? But if you didn't know, today is Pentecost. Can somebody turn down the soft music? Yeah, well, it's completely distracting and I don't know where I am. Anyways, today is Pentecost Sunday. And back in April, I suppose, when it looked like COVID might last longer than just 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, I thought, man, I'd really like to have Pentecost Sunday back at church. But as I prayed about it, I felt God was saying, don't make it stink. Let me take care of it. And I thought, we're not going to hit Pentecost Sunday. Maybe June 7th is the first time we'll be able to have church together. But God pulled strings, and here we are today. So if things are a little rough, if you notice that the lawn's not cut yet and the grass is still real long at the church, we weren't ready. My lawnmower needed new tires and all that stuff came and is ready, but still got to get down here and cut the grass. So hopefully next week that stuff will be ready. But what is Pentecost Sunday? I'm sure a lot of you guys remember, Pentecost comes from 50 days after Passover. And it was an important holiday and festival for the Jewish people. And we see many times in the Bible that God likes to do things on the holidays he set up. It's pretty interesting, right? Like, he gave us these days for a reason. So, we have Pentecost, and as I'm sure you know, the disciples, along with some others, were all waiting because Jesus told them to wait. So they were obedient. Now, what's interesting is 500 people were there when Jesus said, wait, and he ascended into heaven. 120 were in the upper room. Now, I don't know if those 380 people just didn't wait. They got back to do other things, whatever it is. But 120 people remained. I'd hate to think that it started off 500 people waiting together and a couple people were dropping out here and there, kind of thing, like, man. So it's like, it's been so long, like, what am I going to do? And, would you hate to be the guy who leaves and then you hear that 20 minutes after you left, the Holy Spirit came? Because you're like, I've been waiting long enough. Nothing's going to happen. I'm going to go back to doing my own thing. And so sometimes when God says wait, we wait. And we wait, and we wait. Because he's going to do what he's going to do when he's going to do it.
Right.
And we can miss out if we get frustrated that he's not working on our time frame.
Yeah.
So that's my first observation. Let's go to Acts chapter 2. It says, when the day of Pentecost arrived, they were all together in one place. And suddenly there came from heaven a sound like a mighty rushing wind. And it filled the entire house where they were sitting. And divided tongues as of fire appeared to them and rested on each one of them. And they were all filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other tongues as the Spirit gave them utterance. Now there were dwelling in Jerusalem Jews, devout men from every nation under heaven. Every nation under heaven. And at the sound, the multitude came together, and they were bewildered, because each one was hearing them speak in his own language. And they were amazed and astonished, saying, "Are not all these who are speaking Galileans? And how is it that we hear, each of us, in his own native language? Parthians, and Medes, and Elamites, and residents of Mesopotamia, Judea, Cappadocia, Pontus, and Asia, Phrygia, and Pamphylia, Egypt, and the parts of Libya belonging to Cyrene, and visitors from Rome, both Jews and proselytes, Cretans and Arabians. We hear them telling in our own tongues the mighty works of God." And all who were amazed and perplexed, saying to one another, "What does this mean?" But others, mocking, said, "They are filled with new wine." Now, here's another thing. When God shows up in power, it is confusing to people. It doesn't fit into our boxes. And it's very easy to say, "I don't think that's God," because he wouldn't do that. That's not normal. I'm not used to that. That's not God. That's weird. These people must be drunk. Or this must be, they're just doing something weird on their own. That's not God. That's not the God I know. But when God comes in power, he often blows away our expectations. And he does so for a purpose. Now, in the past couple of months, we've looked at the fruit of the Spirit. And what happens in our lives when the Holy Spirit comes in and fills us. The fruit of the Spirit is the result of the Spirit dwelling in us. It's not necessarily the purpose of being filled with the Spirit. It's what happens. It's the result. God gives us the Holy Spirit so that we may be empowered and transformed. If you go back to Acts chapter 1, verse 8, and Jesus is speaking, he says, "But you will receive power when my Holy Spirit comes upon you, and you will be filled with God bumps, and you'll have a good time, and you can go back to your normal lives." Right? Is that what it says? No. He says, "You will be filled with power, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the utmost parts of the earth." We have the power of God, not so we feel good, although that happens. It's a great secondary effect to feel good, to be encouraged, to know that we're loved by God, to know that he's with us. It's great that we're transformed and the fruit of the Spirit's outpouring of our lives. But it's not so we can say, "Oh man, that's great. It feels so good to come in." It feels great when the Holy Spirit comes upon us and I just get wiped out. I get, floored and I can't do anything else but bask in his presence. That's awesome. I've been there countless times. I can't even number that high, and I'm pretty good at math. But that's not the purpose of why God does it.
Amen, that's right.
God gives us that power. He fills us with the Holy Spirit so we can be empowered to do ministry.
Amen.
So that we can change lives.
Amen.
There is a principle in Bible study, and I think it comes from Jewish scholars of the Hebrew language, things like that. When they're looking at a word to say, what does this word mean? They look at the first time it's used in the Bible to see what does it mean there, because that sets the precedent for the meaning for the rest of the time it's in the Bible. The first time something happens sets the precedent. It's like, this is what the purpose is. The first time people are filled with the Holy Spirit, they immediately, without control, are telling of the works and awesome things of God to every nation under earth. The first time the Holy Spirit fell on people, evangelism, love, ministry, missions happens. First time the Holy Spirit falls on people, they go from 120 to 3,120. Now, if you want to look at it, that is 2,500% increase. In other words, if that same ratio were to happen here, every person here, including Rob and Emma, now have a home group of 25 people that they're responsible for. Right? Are you ready to lead a small group of 25 people, new believers? It's pretty awesome, right?
Yeah.
And that's what we want
Yeah.
with the Holy Spirit falling down on us. God bumps are great. I love when the Holy Spirit falls and you can just it's like a warm, tingly blanket, right? And you just feel the presence of God and it fills you and it gives you peace, it gives you love, gives you joy. That's wonderful, but it can't end there. It has to go beyond that. God doesn't empower us so that we have superpowers, right? His job is not to make a bunch of superheroes who stay at home. He makes superheroes so they can go out and be superheroes. How boring would the Avengers be if they just stayed home? If you watched the last Avengers movie, Thor gets depressed, right? And he's just sitting at home, playing video games, drinking beer, and he gets fat. And he sits there, he's not doing anything. He's just consuming, and he's not doing what he's supposed to do. He has great power, but he doesn't do it. A lot of times, that's what happens to us as Christians when we're not out there loving others. When we're not out there telling people how great Jesus is and how our lives are changed. And we do it in love. We don't, shove it down people's throats and make people think that, Jesus hates them or anything like that. We tell them how great Jesus is. You don't have to go into apologetics and all these things about, different theologies, things like that. Just tell a simple story of what God has done for you. Because nobody can deny that. Because it happened to you. It's your story.
That's right.
When I was in Bible school, one of our professors was really big on personal evangelism. And so he was teaching us about personal evangelism, things like that. And he had gone and made a track with his own story in it, his own testimony in this track. And in the track, it was just what God had done in his life, how he got saved, how he'd been transformed. And he'd print up a bunch of copies of this track, and he'd ask that God would give him every day opportunities to pass this to people. And he said sometimes it'd be on a bus where he just talked to somebody for like a minute, and then he'd say, hey, do you want to read something about my life? And he said, almost everybody says yes, because they're like, well, I don't know, who are you? Like, you have something written about your life? Like, maybe I just ran into a famous person. And they're like, oh, yeah. And you just hand him a track. And he said he saw people hold this track and read it, rather than if you give them a chick track, even those great comics, people just throw that away. Unless, yeah, not in Mexico, not in like India, other places, they devour those things. A lot of times you people are like, oh, it's just one of those Christian things. But if you give people a story about yourself, they're like, I'm going to read this and figure out what it is.
Yeah, that's cool.
And he had story upon story of coming into contact with people. He said one time he's walking down the road and there's a tennis court